So before we begin, I want to take a moment to ground us. I'm speaking to you from Hamilton, Ontario, which is land covered by the Treaty of Between the Lakes and the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. The same systems that criminalize drug use, create housing insecurity, and allow people to die are built on land theft, displacement, and ongoing violence against Indigenous people. So acknowledging the land also means acknowledging that overdose deaths are not accidents. They're political decisions made within colonial systems that decide whose lives are worth saving. If you're listening and this feels heavy, you're allowed to pause. You don't owe anybody your pain or your attention. Take care of yourself first. But this podcast exists to tell the truth about what's happening on the ground and to honor the people we've lost by fighting for something better for the people still here. And I guess I'll give a brief introduction of myself just in case you don't know who I am. But my name is Kayla. I am a harm reduction worker, a person with lived experience with drug use. I lost my dad to a drug overdose in May 2020. So that was 3 months into the pandemic. And I did a bunch of research on how the pandemic impacted the opiate epidemic, and then I kind of tailored my research more into exposing the political violence that the government has inflicted upon people who use drugs, and formed a harm reduction outreach group that operates 365. And we hand out gear to people, respond to overdoses, community cleanups, things like that. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, but I guess I have to introduce you too. So I do have a guest here, and this guest is very important. Today's episode is about power, who has it, who doesn't, and who pays the price when governments choose punishment over care. So Canada likes to tell itself a comforting story that we're compassionate, progressive, evidence-based, but when it comes to the overdose crisis, our policies tell a very different truth. We criminalize people who use drugs, we regulate care instead of expanding it, and we allow a poison drug supply to persist while debating whether people deserve to live. And to unpack that, I'm joined today by somebody whose work has fundamentally shaped how many of us understand this crisis. And so I'm honored to be joined by Garth Mullins. Garth is the host and creator of Crackdown, an award-winning investigative podcast that documents the overdose crisis through the voices of people who use drugs, organizers, and harm reduction workers, people that are most often excluded from policy conversations. So where are my questions? Sorry. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your relationship to drug use or harm reduction, just for people who might not know you?
Sure. Thanks for having me on the first episode of your podcast, Kayla. I really appreciate that. And I'm sorry about your dad. Really a lot of respect to you for doing this work, when that was so relatively recent and so direct and personal. So I really appreciate it. I'm coming to you from Vancouver, Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh territory here on the edge of Canada. And what was the question again? You said, can you tell me about what?
Yeah, just yourself, just to give a little brief background on yourself, which you did pretty much. But yeah, thank you for being here. I'm honored because I've read your book. I've listened to the podcast. I've been a follower for a long time, and I cried when you followed me. So I was like, holy shit. Because you're big time, man. And you've done some real huge shit. Seriously, for people on the bottom, as myself, I consider myself not that. I'm doing a lot for myself, but you know what I mean? You've got a book published. I was gassed. So thank you.
I'm just a foot soldier in a never-ending war. I'm just a small part of a big army of us who are trying to change things. Honestly never thought that I'd be writing a book or doing interviews or talking to people about this sort of thing, because my story is, I started using heroin as a teenager, and back then there was no nice words like people who use drugs. There was no harm reduction. We had to share syringes, and it was a pretty nasty, kind of tough world. In a lot of ways it still is. In a lot of ways it's worse. But there was no space to have such conversations. I was extremely ashamed of my situation, right? I never would have talked about this stuff. So I'm very surprised to be doing this. But I was lucky to be, here in Vancouver and in the downtown east side, where there's a group of people who have been fighting for a quarter of a century to end the drug war and to give us some dignity and life back. And they showed me how you don't have to be ashamed. They showed me the power in activism and in fighting back. And so just by work with them, people like Dean Wilson, Laura Shaver, Charisse Kiwatin, I was able to shed a lot of my own shame and just get out of my own way and start organizing and start doing the work that, the work that we both do.
Yeah, honestly, what you said there is kind of important to me too. The reason why I wanted to have you, and I'm also interviewing Ann Livingston too, is because I'm kind of trying to bridge the gaps between like the OGs of harm reduction to kind of like the new age of harm reduction that might like even myself, I'll speak for myself. I have a lot to learn. And like I have a lot of things that I need to change about myself too to be able to do this work effectively for people, to keep other people safe, including myself. Like I understand like yeah, we people of my generation should be looking up to people like you and those the people that came before you even as well. And like these conversations need to be had so we can learn from one another, learn from what's new and changing versus what we know has been working for a long time. But
Yeah,
going,
Anne's a
oh,
good
go
a
ahead.
good friend and comrade. I've
Yeah.
known Anne for a long time, and back in the day, I was just trying to get on methadone, and it was so rationed that I couldn't get on a program. But at that same time, I didn't know them. But Anne and Dean had started the Vancouver area network of drug users, and they were fighting for more spaces in the methadone program. And so I directly benefited from a fight that they were having that I didn't even know about. And
Yep.
it was a few more years before I would get involved and understand what they had been doing and how it all worked. But I've benefited. I'm alive probably because of the fights that people before me have led. And Anne and Dean are still involved and still doing it.
I know it's insane. I have her as a Facebook friend and I cried about her too. I'm so emotional. But yeah, but here, let me get into my juicy questions now, because
All
yeah.
right.
So, Crackdown centers people who use drugs as experts, including the people we've mentioned. Why was that important to you, and how does that challenge the way drug policy conversations usually happen in Canada?
I mean, it's because there's been a fight forever over who gets to own knowledge, who gets to generate knowledge, whose knowledge gets to inform policy. And for the longest time, we were kept on the outside. We're still on the very periphery, but we have kicked our way into a few rooms where policy decisions are made. Granted, it's mostly at the kids' table, not at the real adults' decision making table, but that struggle is still ongoing. But I thought it was really important because, you don't understand what's going on. You don't understand the true nature of drug use, the drug war, overdose deaths, the true cost, and just the texture of the life, really, unless you're in it. And so we wanted to represent ourselves better. We'd been standing on the outside watching media portrayals of ourselves, and we were pretty dissatisfied with it. Sometimes the media portrayals are right wing and really insulting. They just repeat lies and disinformation, or they scapegoat drug users, or they try to pin it all on harm reduction or something like that. And then there's sort of mushy middle media that maybe gives you a note of pathos, but never looks at the overdose crisis as something that's a force of policy. It's just like a force of nature for them, or just something that's happening outside of the control of human beings. I thought this is like a terrible way to cover things. But we were going through struggles at VANDU, the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users, that weren't properly covered by the media. They just never had the texture, the detail. There was never enough space. The assumptions were never clear enough. I just thought we needed more time and more space. And the idea for people of the drug user activist, back when we started doing this, it just wasn't out there. It wasn't known. And we wanted to put it on the table. We wanted to show that, yeah, we're building a social movement that's fighting for rights like so many have of people who've gotten the shitty end of the stick all over the world before us. And that's why we started Crackdown. We wanted to put the voices of drug users at the middle because that's who we are. The editorial board and myself, that's our experience. So we wouldn't really do it any other way. We also bring in the voices of academics and researchers that we work alongside and other people to help show that what we're saying isn't just bullshit, because drug users have been forever just sort of treated as suspect or lying, or people just roll their eyes thinking it's some kind of scam what we're saying. And so when we get to show that it's backed up by research and science, then I think that helps us get more credibility in the eyes of maybe people who aren't like part of our community, or even people like me. Like I used to think the street is always full of gossip, it's always full of bullshit, I never know what's true. So sorting that all out using the tools of traditional journalism, like investigative journalism, double sourcing, giving people a chance to react, doing all the research and backing stuff up, fact checking, we do that. But we're real movement journalism, and movement journalism puts the voices of the community right at the center. We don't pretend that we're neutral or objective. We are on the side of the community. We're on the side of drug users. And we say that all up front. We're very transparent about it so people can then make their own decisions. But, it's just part of our methodology to put the voices of drug users at the front.
Yeah, and I think like that's kind of what I'm trying to do with this podcast too. Kind of not like copying the idea, but trying to carry on that idea where people from my city at least I'm focusing on and just like uplifting the voices of people on the bottom that don't really
Yeah,
get to the
Kayla,
type.
we never thought up movement journalism. It's like that's
Yeah,
like
no, like
100
that's not
years
even a
old or
thing.
200 years old or something like that, right? So we're just in the tradition. Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess you kind of talked about it a bit right now, but in your reporting, like, how do you understand how prohibition itself is like a form of structural violence? How, like, not just a failed policy, but an actively harmful one? You talked about how people like to think it's like not a human-made policy decision. Could you go more into that a little bit?
I mean, we start by surfacing the mechanics of prohibition. Like we name the laws and the policies. We name the officials and the politicians who are involved in it. And we take the listener right to where prohibition started. Like prohibition in Canada got its start about a kilometer from where I am now, in an alley behind the old city hall here on the downtown east side. This is where the first arrest under the Opium Act happened. This is where a racist riot happened. This is where the government came and found out that there were opium dens and got all outraged about that. Prohibition started right here, 1907, 1908. It started in a huge racist backlash against Chinese and Japanese residents of the city. It was like mainstream politics then, as it is now, this kind of racism. And we sort of felt like, since it's our neighborhood where this all started, we sort of felt like we had a mandate from history to shut it down here too. So we wanted to make prohibition a real granular street level concept that people could see and hear, like a human created policy structure, and not something esoteric or academic or abstract, but something you could see and hear. And that alley, I've shot dope in that alley. I've run away from the cops down that alley. Like we've lost friends in that alley. This is a place that is haunted with the ghosts of history. I mean, that's what prohibition is told. It's told in lives. It's told in deaths. And we wanted to make that very real and visceral to people.
Yeah, I like how you said that it's haunted with like, oh wait, it erased what you said. Now I can't read it word for word. Okay, here. Haunted with the ghosts of history. Sorry. But when you think about like, I guess like the overdose crisis now, how does it feel to you, I guess, emotionally and politically compared to when you first started this work, when you were in those alleys using drugs yourself? What have you noticed has changed?
Well, this is my second officially declared public health emergency for overdoses. In the 90s, I was shooting China White heroin there. And that was real strong heroin, and people were dying from it. But we didn't have, um, a drug user union like Vandu. We didn't have very much harm reduction. We didn't have naloxone. So we struggled to bring each other back. I brought people back without naloxone, and it was very difficult. But we had no access to good medical information or anything. So we just had, everyone's various sort of like folk tales about how to resuscitate people. So it was really difficult. And that was, our first crisis in the 90s. And then the second one here started in 2016 in April. So we're heading for, we're close to 10 years of this now. And I've sort of felt all the feelings. I watched more than half of the people I come up with die and leave the world forever. And so I felt sad and grief stricken for the loss, just continual loss over the years of these people. I've been to so many more funerals and memorials than I have to weddings or baby showers or high school graduations or whatever. I've lost track of the number. It's probably in the hundreds. I don't know. And I felt that grief, and I've also kind of felt lonely. I've also kind of felt like my generation, the people I came up with, the people that I know are all leaving, and I'm just going to be here by myself. I felt angry that the government sits around and drags its feet, or worse, is reversing all of the things that could actually keep people alive and is chipping away at them. We've suffered a whole bunch of setbacks in the last couple of years of things that we'd spent a generation fighting for. And so I felt that kind of anger too. And then I've also felt numbness, like I just can't keep feeling anything for 10 years solid. So there's times that I just feel empty and numb. And I think that, I know that I've got PTSD from other parts in my life, but this is sure triggered that. I don't know anybody who's involved in this work who probably doesn't have that sort of ricocheting around inside them, tearing things up. So I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do from
For
your
sure.
dad.
God, have you seen me online? I'm messed up.
And the anticipatory grief. So grief for things that haven't happened yet.
Yeah.
Like for people that haven't died yet, but I know they're gonna,
And
and
this,
so it's you feel it coming.
a lot of these deaths too, they're very much framed as like tragic accidents, awful things that like happened out of nowhere. But like when overdoses are described as tragic, what do you think that language is obscuring about like political responsibility?
It makes me think of this graph. Um, this graph that Health Canada has. They model overdose deaths, and they use I guess a computer model with some formulas, and so they're able to predict how many people are going to die over the next 3 months or whatever when they run this model every so often, and they give different scenarios like what do we do if the drugs get worse? What do we do if we institute more harm reduction programs? You can see the line starting to go down. And so there's these different scenarios about the strengths of drugs and the harm reduction programs that are available. And so by not choosing to implement more harm reduction, the government knows exactly how many people they're going to kill. So I don't think it's tragic. I think it's necropolitics. I think that for them, we are not worthy of saving, that we are the ungrievable, that our lives are not worth caring about, memorializing, that we are already dead for them, that we are already corpses.
Yeah.
So they don't even care. So that graph to them doesn't mean a thing. For me, it makes my blood boil to know that, back in the buildings of Gatineau or Ottawa, the big office towers or whatever, they can count exactly how many of us are going to die. And then in Parliament, choose to do it.
I've lived in Ottawa and you can literally, people overdose right outside of the parliament. I hosted a protest on parliament and I'm not a big group, right? Like Solidarity Alliance is just me and like a few people that volunteer that come and go. But the founder and the person running everything is me. They had police lined up, like seriously, like deep for just like a little 10-person protest. But when you mention drug users, like the bells ring. And that you mentioned, you kind of like brought that up as well. But like, how does the criminalization of people who use drugs kind of shape people's daily lives? Like, what role do police and stigma and like the cutting off of services play in whether people survive?
Well, we've lost a lot of services around here because of fiscal restraint. The city has cut a lot of programs in its recent budget this year, except for they extended the cops another $50 million. So the cops have a $500 million a year here. And, if you're in the downtown east side, which is kind of the epicenter of the overdose crisis in Canada, or at least it has been, you'll see every minute that you're there, you'll see cops.
Yeah.
Other parts of the city, you could go days maybe without seeing a cop, but you'll just see cops every minute there. There's always resources for police. There's never enough resources to save us, to keep us alive, but there's always resources for police. And criminalization to me means that they're the enemy. It means that we have to hide from them. It means that people are using in alleys. It means that people are afraid to come forward. Criminalization means that people can lose their jobs if they get caught with a hot piss test or something. If they're working in the oil patch or something, they can get blacklisted from the industry or whatever. It means that you can get evicted from some places that you could live. It means your family could ostracize you. It means that you could get your kid taken off you by the state. Your whole life is changed by criminalization. You are cast out of regular society, and the regular means for the people can redress things through laws and courts. You don't get that. You just don't get the regular benefit of a doubt that other people in society might get. You're just already the outsider, and that's what it means. It's to be cast out.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. And like, who benefits from the system when we're cast out? It's the people at the top that are profiting off of our tragic losses, the medicalization of addiction and treatment, and like all of these things. Like, this is all like just a scheme for them to make more money off of our pain, realistically, in my opinion, at least. Like, I've noticed the correlation between them shutting down services and then increasing options for like medicalized treatments and the safe supply, then cutting off safe supply and coming up with different ideas of what safe supply could mean, or just, you know what I mean? How these things impact overdose trends over time. Hamilton's overdose rate, for reference, is higher than our provincial average. So Hamilton's in Ontario. Obviously, you know that, but just for listeners that don't know that, like, why do you think that is? When you look at cities like Hamilton, what kind of feels familiar from elsewhere and what feels kind of like intensified here, if you know anything about the city?
Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, I've only been to Hamilton once, and it was a real long time ago. I think there was like, it was cold.
That's
Cold the whole
funny.
time I was
I know
there.
Vancouver's hot, man. You guys are lucky. We're freezing.
I just didn't have proper cold weather clothes when I was there, so I was cold. I was there to do a talk at the university, I think.
Cool.
And but I can't honestly can't remember too much else about it.
No, that's okay. I guess, I don't know. I kind of just wanted to talk about how, let me see where my question went in. Like, kind of like what patterns in Vancouver would explain what's happening here. You know what I mean? Like, kind of connecting, like, what do you think has happened in Vancouver that has increased the overdose trends that would maybe be the same thing that's happening here? You know what I mean?
I think every time the police go in, kick in doors, and arrest dealers, that increases overdoses. That destabilizes the drug supply, which is already contaminated and unstable. So that could have an effect. If you have a bigger Indigenous population, Indigenous people are getting the worst of the overdose crisis. They're overrepresented in like ODs and deaths, in stop and searches, in carding, in arrests, in police harassment and beatings, like you name it. Indigenous people got it worse. So if Hamilton has a bigger Indigenous population, that can be part of it too. If there's a kind of conservative voters there, that can have an effect. You know, some cities, some municipalities just simply refuse to have any kind of overdose prevention site or anything like that. And they just try and lock all that down. That could be depending on what the politics of the city are like, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
I never try to. I never speak about what I
But
places
you
I
don't know.
go.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
No, but I like that. Like, honestly, that's kind of the answer I was hoping to get, kind of like the what could you see being similar there that it's happening here. But let's get into something a little bit more like up my alley. I'm all about riots and resistance, if you know anything about me. So Crackdown has documented fierce resistance to just like the lack of harm reduction and the closures and stuff like that. And yeah, like, who do you think is benefiting from this resistance? What do you think Crackdown was hoping to do when you were framing it as like kind of like, yeah, like that pushback against?
I just think we don't get anything that we don't fight for.
Mhm.
Like everything, like votes for women, the weekend, health and safety at work, speed limits. Like everything has come from people fighting for it. And that's the same with harm reduction. You know, needle distribution and overdose prevention sites, those things came from direct action first. People did them first without permission, did them illegally, risking arrest. Right. And sometimes that's what it takes. Breaking unjust laws is fundamentally part of driving things forward. And that's not just for drug users, that's for everybody. That's for anybody who's oppressed or exploited or whatever. And so, you know, we saw people in the 90s distributing syringes. I got new syringes from first from a guy who handed them out of his trunk, who was like, you know, a medical student or something like that, you know. And we've all benefited from when Ann Livingston and others opened unpermitted safe injection site back in the mid 90s. Before Insight was open, they did it by direct action, civil disobedience first. And that's what the Drug User Liberation Front was about. 2020, we formed this group because we were tired of waiting for safe supply and watching our friends die. And we sourced heroin, meth, and coke. We tested it with mass spectrometry and distributed it to people who were within our drug user groups, just as an act to show this is how easy it could be. Of course, this was totally illegal because drugs are illegal. And eventually the police did raid us and arrest two of our members and charge them with 3 counts each of possession for the purposes of trafficking. But this is the kind of resistance that it takes. And this is what it takes to push things forward. You know, I don't see any other path around it. And we've continued to see when they shut down overdose prevention sites in some hospitals here, some doctors got together and opened them outside of the hospital without permission that were illegal. And I think, well, one of the doctors got drummed right out of her job for it. So, you know, that's that's the type of organizing that it takes.
How violence against violence is necessary in order to move forward. We can't just keep being the ones getting pushed down. But I guess you talked a lot about drug user organizing. And I think I want to touch on that too. What do you think people misunderstand about drug user organizing? Like what scares governments most about people using drugs, people who use drugs?
Well, I think the government doesn't like to have their arm twisted. They don't like to be pressured into doing things. They would prefer to just decide for themselves, I think. And so, of course, they found it irritating for us to be, trying to coerce them into changing policies and doing things differently. And they don't worry about us very much right now. Our movement is on the back foot because the right is really ascendant. The far right is forming big parties, are actually getting into government around the world. If you look at the US, if you look at Europe, even our conservative party has taken a big steps to the right here. And they are really taking control of drug policy narratives right now in a strong way. So that just shows that our movement has to double down and be even better organized and put pressure on them, put pressure on government, and bring that pressure to bear again. Because government is never giving us the things we need just because a nice person with a good heart got elected or the right evidence was put before the right policymaker. It's never been like that. It's always taken community power to actually force changes to come. And we still have to do that. The challenge is still the same. We have to raise the costs on the government of the status quo. And there is no magical number of our dead, no stack of corpses so high that the government will suddenly go, oh my God, that's too many. We have to do something. It's never
Yeah.
been that way. Our deaths don't count for enough, in Ottawa or any of the provincial capitals. But I should say that drug users are a huge number in Canada. We are millions strong. If we were organized, we could be writing, we could be holding the pen on drug policy. And so that's really a challenge to us, to not just have small cadres of drug users like at Van Du or something, but to have giant national networks, unions that are huge and strong and have hundreds of thousands of members. That's what we need to be doing.
Yeah, it's hard with like interpersonal drama though. I feel like a lot of people get so strung up on like what's good and what's bad with their own like personal biases and just like people policing each other way too much. And I'm like talking from my own personal biases myself when I say that. So like that right there is an example of it. You know what I mean? Like I genuinely don't. I do see in the future where we have a grand, because like that's exactly what like the AIDS movement was. It was people coming together and fighting for a cause they all believed in, whether they were like, directly impacted by it or not. Everybody is directly impacted by this crisis, I feel like, too, just because of like everybody having to witness it, whether they are a drug user or not. But I guess if you could speak directly to policymakers with all that in mind, what would you say if like you could say it unfiltered, I guess?
Well, we have to tear up the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. We just have to stop it now, right? I mean, if you think about it, if we never did this over a century-long experiment with prohibition, people would still be smoking opium, and that's quite genteel compared to what's going on right now. But we have medetomidine here in the drug supply now, which is a veterinary sedative used on horses and cattle. It's much stronger than xylazine, which is also a tranquilizer, and nobody wanted this in the drugs, right? People wanted heroin. They didn't want fentanyl, and they got used to fentanyl. And benzos came in, and they had to get used to benzos or got a benzo habit. Now tranq is coming in. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse. So we could do something now before the next great phase of whatever drug contaminants come in. We could act now and actually, bring some rules and regulations like to this whole thing, so that instead of it just being a wild west where anyone could make anything and sell it as anything, we could use the same standards as pharmaceutical production. But the government isn't interested in that. But if I could tell them, if they were listening, I'd say that's what it's going to take.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Something like a regulated, safer supply. It's so
Mm.
easy. The same thing they did with alcohol. I don't understand why the concept to other people is so difficult to to perceive in their brains. I guess speaking to people like us, what do you want people who use drugs to hear, or understand from this episode? What gives you hope?
You're
I
not
guess
alone.
both.
You're not alone. That drug users can be really lonely. You can be at it by yourself. You can be undercover and not telling anybody and trying to keep it a secret or really ashamed of it. If you can find your people, that's greatly liberating. It's greatly breaking through that loneliness is tremendously helpful. That's what I would do. Find your people. That's what we wanted Crackdown to be. We wanted it to be a voice, sometimes a voice just coming over the air to someone who doesn't have anybody. And we've gotten lots of emails and messages back from people who've heard us who are just out there alone and, have been able to find us or have been able to find other drug users and just club together a little bit, because we have the strongest forces in history arrayed against us and we're in some of the weakest positions. So getting together is the only way we can survive.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I guess for listeners that maybe aren't drug users, what responsibility do you think listeners carry once they understand how these deaths aren't accidental, and what should listeners do after they turn this episode off?
Well, don't make things worse. So, like wherever you are, your church or your mosque, your community center, or your big workplace, maybe your family has got drug users in it, right? We're undercover everywhere. We're not just like a stereotype that you see on the news or something like that. We're everywhere. And so know that we're probably your friends or coworkers or neighbors or something like that. And, if you want to live in a world where we're neighborly to each other and friendly, we can choose that world. If you want to live in a world that's a police state, well, that's the direction we're going right now with the drug war. More police, less rights, that whole narrative. So I would encourage people to not join that side. Find out more if you want to. Also understand that people don't know a lot about drug policy. It's complicated. A lot of what the politicians are saying is bullshit. It can be kind of hard to follow, and everyone's busy, working 3 jobs or picking up their kids or whatever. So I'm not blaming people for not knowing what's going on or having mistaken views about it. So forgive yourself too. We've all been growing up in this society that's so full of drug war propaganda. We're bound to get some of it on us. But you can choose to deprogram yourself also. You can, choose to take a more nuanced and humane view of things. And that's what I would do.
My final question to you is, where can people find your work and support what you're doing and learn more about what's going on in the drug user world from your point of view?
Well, my book, Crackdown by Garth Mullins, is available at just about any bookstore. It's also on, the places where you can find audiobooks like Audible and whatever stuff like that. I read it, and it's also at the library. Probably most libraries, or a bunch of them. If it's not, you can ask your library for it. Our podcast is also called Crackdown, and it's everywhere that you get podcasts. We have been making this documentary series for I guess we're in our 7th year now, so there's lots of back issues you can listen to, back episodes to listen to. And I'm part of the Vancouver area network of drug users. I have been for a very long time. We're a group out of Vancouver, and if you have money and you want to support Crackdown Pod, slash patreon.com. No, wait, let me try that again. Patreon.com/crackdownpod. We could really use the money. We're really struggling to keep the lights on around here. So, if you feel like helping out, that'd be great. But also, wherever you are, there's probably a need for volunteers. So wherever you are in the listening range of this podcast, there's probably need for volunteers. Just reach out.
Yeah, and I guess that'll tie into me. You've been listening to ODs Are Political Hamilton by Kayla Hagerty. I am the founder of Solidarity Alliance of People Who Use Drugs. It's a 24/7, 365 harm reduction outreach group run by people who use drugs for people who use drugs. And if that's something you're interested in and you want to get involved in this from a starting point of view, I don't care where you're coming in from. I don't care if you have biases. I will break those walls down and I will teach you something today. But this podcast exists because too many people I love are dead and too many more are being put at risk every single day by policy decisions made far away from the streets that they affect. This podcast ends with a simple truth. Overdoses are not accidents. They are political decisions. So thanks. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Kayla. Thanks for doing what you're doing. Keep it on and stay safe and keep 6.
Yeah, you too, bro. Thank you.